Baby shark. that I get. Oh my god!
Yo. Oh, you're stupid. Yeah.
I mean that I get. Oh my god!
Oh. Oh, you're stupid. Yeah.
What? Take my shoes off? Because you have there's just too much on the inside.
Oh.
Yeah.
I got a Skylines.
Oh my god, it's getting worse. It's shooting worse. Oh my god. Dude.
Blow on to me.
To have touched our lives.
taxpayers are the biggest funder of the World Health Organization. But it's rife with corruption, and it's done some sketchy things when it comes to China's coronavirus outbreak. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. When the world is threatened by an outbreak of a deadly coronavirus from China, who are you gonna call? No. Who? The World Health Organization. I can see how that could be confusing. Let's just stick with WHO. And I can see how the WHO's response to the coronavirus could also be confusing, because it's hard to understand how the main global organization charged with handling it could have screwed up so badly. The World Health Organization is a United Nations body concerned with world health, at least supposedly. But it turns out corruption in the agency is putting lives at risk. By now, it's a recognized fact that the Chinese Communist Party has used a two-step solution to deal with the coronavirus. Step one, cover it up. They arrested whistleblowing doctors and journalists. And state-run media either kept numbers of infections impossibly low or didn't report on it at all. But after weeks of cover-up allowed the virus to spread across China and around the world, it became too big to cover up. So then, step two, authoritarian crackdown. The Chinese regime has quarantined much of Hubei province where the outbreak began. It is the largest quarantine in human history, with tens of millions of people affected. And now, much of the rest of the country is under lockdown as well. Now you might be thinking a quarantine makes sense, right? Except on this ginormous scale, it doesn't actually work well. It's been authoritarian, heavy-handed, and often arbitrary, varying from one village or city to another. And this has made Chinese people lose trust in their government. Some people look for ways to escape the quarantine zones, and many don't report to authorities when they get sick because the consequences could include being put in a quarantine center next to hundreds of other sick people. In some cases, people have said that the quarantine centers don't have enough medical staff or even food. According to an expert at the University of Edinburgh, the way Chinese authorities have gone about it is quite dangerous because you actually start to erode that trust in the government. You want citizens coming forward and saying, "I feel unwell." The Chinese Communist Party is getting slammed with international criticism for how they handled the coronavirus. But guess who hasn't been criticizing them? The World Health Organization. In fact, the WHO has been praising how the Communist Party has handled it. This is the Director General of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom, meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping 3 weeks ago. At the time, Tedros said, "We appreciate the seriousness with which China is taking this outbreak, especially the commitment from top leadership and the transparency they have demonstrated." He also said, China is actually setting a new standard for outbreak response. Detaining activists who criticize Xi Jinping? Technically, that is a new standard for outbreak response. Anyway, Tedros lavished praise on China, despite the fact that it took nearly 2 weeks for the agency to get a go-ahead from China to send even an advance team, which arrived in Beijing on February 10th to discuss a joint mission. Tedros' praise of China has been so lavish, he's been featured repeatedly in Chinese state-run media, like this video from the People's Daily.
China took action massively at the epicenter, at the source of the outbreak. This is heroic. The actions of China is making us safer.
Maybe it's just me, but I don't feel a whole lot safer. And keep in mind, Tedros was praising China's authoritarian response to the virus at the same time he was criticizing other countries, especially the US, for travel bans to and from China.
There is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade. We call on all countries to implement decisions that are evidence-based and consistent.
Good thing no one listened to him. Major world airports set up screening procedures for travelers who had recently been to China. Many airlines simply stopped flights to and from China. You know, it's not a great thing when people ignore the main global organization that's meant to advise everyone on health crises. Tedros also said in an interview that the quarantine of tens of millions of Chinese people is consistent with the WHO's regulations that call for the least intrusive measures possible and strong protection for freedom of movement and other human rights. Least intrusive? I would hate to see what the WHO actually considers intrusive. Incidentally, Tedros was a leader in Ethiopia's Tigray People's Liberation Front. That's a wing of the ruling Marxist-rooted Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. He served the violently repressive regime as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2012 to 2016 after a stint as Health Minister. So I would really hate to see what Tedros considers intrusive. Though he did say, "I think that human rights and so on should be respected." Yeah, human rights and so on, yada yada yada. But Tedros isn't the only one in the WHO who's praising the Chinese Communist Party's response to the coronavirus. Another WHO representative recently told a panel, "The people of China feel protected. We all need to take a step back and admire what's happened." Remember Peter Humphrey, the British private investigator who was jailed in China in 2013? He had been drugged, chained to a chair, locked in a cage, and then made to read out a statement written by the police in front of the cameras. The anchor who presented the footage, James Chow, is now a goodwill ambassador with the World Health Organization. This kind of praise for China has been going on for years. This statement from former WHO Director General Margaret Chan says, in the eyes of the world, China is increasingly seen as a model for development at many levels. China has lifted millions of its people out of poverty. And China is extremely fortunate to have a president who has made health the center of all government policies. And if the people don't want to be healthy, sometimes you just gotta force them. Incidentally, Beijing backed the appointment of Margaret Chan, a former director of health in Hong Kong, as WHO Director General from 2006 to 2017. But beyond just praise, the Chinese regime seems incredibly successful at getting the WHO to bow down to its claims over Taiwan. In case you don't know, Taiwan is a sovereign country with its own government, military, and currency. But the Chinese regime considers it part of China. And China has used its influence in the WHO to keep Taiwan out. Here's a speech given at a WHO meeting last year.
There is simply no principled basis why Taiwan should not be here. The only reason why it is not here now is because of the fact that the government in Beijing does not like the current administration in Taipei.
And yet, Taiwan is not allowed to join the World Health Organization as a member state, or even as an observer. And that puts Taiwan's population of 23 million people at risk. Taiwan's exclusion from the WHO leaves its population vulnerable during this crisis. A lack of direct and timely channels to the WHO have already resulted in inaccurate reporting of cases in Taiwan. Taiwan has repeatedly complained that China and the WHO aren't sharing information about the coronavirus outbreak with them. That's also what happened back in 2003 when the deadly SARS epidemic broke out in China. Besides putting 23 million Taiwanese lives at risk, that also affects the 50 million foreign travelers who pass through Taiwan's airports every year. They might assume the WHO is taking care of things. They would be wrong. In fact, the WHO can't even figure out what to call Taiwan. Last month, a WHO spokesman called it China Taiwan, and then a February 4th report flipped it and listed Taiwan China, but got the number of cases wrong, relying on data from Beijing, not Taipei. Now, the WHO doesn't even mention Taiwan. They recently called it Taipei and environs in a list of affected cities in China. Why does China have this kind of influence over the World Health Organization? It turns out the WHO is horribly corrupt. An audit revealed there has been a surge in internal corruption allegations across the whole of the organization, with the detection of multiple schemes aimed at defrauding large sums of money from the international body. That included an upsurge of internal complaints of corruption, fraud, and even sexual harassment from across the 7,000-strong organization, overwhelming an internal team of 4 full-time investigators and 2 consultants. And yet, the division of the WHO responsible for handling the coronavirus outbreak is so chronically underfunded, it has repeatedly been found to pose a severe and unacceptable level of hazard. Great! So some people in the WHO are scamming loads of money and getting rich, while the coronavirus team is way underfunded. Maybe that's why the WHO delayed issuing a global emergency over the coronavirus, even though human-to-human transmission had already been confirmed. Or maybe it's because of China's role as a donor to the WHO. After this 2017 meeting between Tedros and high-level Chinese leaders, the WHO got a big new financial contribution from China. China also wants to build an $80 million headquarters for the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Guess where they want to build it? In Ethiopia. Wow, what a coincidence that that's Tedros' home country. The US is pretty sure it'll be used for spying. But China's importance to the WHO derives not so much as a current donor, but as a future source of funds and a partner with which to tackle the biggest global health problems. Well, China's got the money and 20% of the world's population. But is the ruling Communist Party really a good partner with which to tackle the biggest global health problems? A lot of health experts are furious at the WHO for their praise of China's response to the coronavirus and their delay in issuing a global emergency. According to Lawrence Gostin, a professor of global health law at Georgetown University, who also provides technical assistance to the WHO, we were deceived. Myself and other public health experts, based on what the World Health Organization and China were saying, reassured the public that this was not serious, that we could bring this under control. Allegations of corruption in the WHO are nothing new. In 2017, this expose from the Associated Press found that nearly half of the WHO's $2 billion budget went to first-class airfare and 5-star hotels. The United States is the largest contributor. U.S. taxpayers fund about a quarter of the WHO's budget. And get this, that doesn't include costs covered by host countries seeking to curry favor, which are off WHO's books. And if you know anything about the Chinese Communist Party and how they buy influence, it's often by spending on lavish trips. Now, there's no evidence that's what happened with the WHO. I'm just a bit concerned, what with all the corruption and bootlicking, especially because the WHO relies on the funding and the cooperation of members to function, giving wealthy member states like China considerable influence. So I know right now you're probably pretty worried about getting accurate information about the coronavirus outbreak. Fear not. The WHO is also battling misinformation, working with Google to ensure that people get facts from leaked from the UN Health Agency first when they searched for information about the virus. And that's why below this video on YouTube, a platform owned by Google, you'll see a link to the WHO, the most trustworthy source of coronavirus information. They put it there automatically. I can't remove it. Of course, if that's not enough to point your opinion in the correct direction, YouTube has also demonetized almost every video I and everyone else on YouTube has published about the coronavirus. You know, to discourage us all from even talking about it outside the official channels. But what Google, YouTube, WHO, and China didn't count on was the amazing support of what I call the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army. They're fans of the show who contribute on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Because of their financial support, I can make an episode about how China, the WHO, and Google don't have your best interests at heart when it comes to the coronavirus outbreak. They can demonetize China Uncensored all they want, and I'll just keep making episodes anyway. So as a thank you to members of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, I answer questions from them at the end of some of my episodes. Today's question comes from Tony Chapkowski. He asks, Tedros, really on the ball? China has huge investments in Ethiopia, where he hails from, and their airline is still flying to China. It makes Kenya, next door, very afraid. You know, I never even thought about that, but it turns out that yes, China is investing heavily in Ethiopia. And since Chinese investment is called debt trap diplomacy, it should come as no surprise that about half of all Ethiopia's debt belongs to China. The largest part of the debt was for the construction of the $4 billion Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway. The Export-Import Bank of China backed the project with $3.3 billion in loans. The railway has so far been crippled by light loads, electricity shortages, and disruptions due to protests. But hey, it connects Ethiopia to China's first overseas military base in Djibouti. So that's worth it, right? Chinese investment in Africa has been called a new colonialism. Could Chinese investment in Ethiopia affect Tedros' decision-making as director-in-chief of the WHO? Obviously, I can't say for sure. But let's just say I feel extra comforted by the WHO link YouTube is putting below this video. Take it away, Tedros.
The actions of China is making us safer.
Thanks for your question, Tony. And thank you for watching. Please be sure to subscribe to China Uncensored. I've been hearing from a lot of subscribers. YouTube has unsubscribed them. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed. Turn that notification bell on so you get notified when we have new episodes. And please, help share these videos. I'm sure the WHO and the Chinese Communist Party will really appreciate it. And as always, check out patreon.com/China Uncensored if you'd like to join the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army to support this show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. Trump pulls U.S. Taiwan is fighting the coronavirus and the World Health Organization. How did a UN body become a slave to China? This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The World Health Organization, WHO. Now, this may surprise you, but the organization whose symbol is a snake coiling around the world is not super trustworthy. Apparently, the logo originates from the story of Asclepius, who was revered by the ancient Greeks as a god of healing. and whose cult involved the use of snakes. Great! The cult of snakes is tasked with global health. On an unrelated note, the World Health Organization is horribly corrupt. So corrupt that a recent audit found that the division tackling the coronavirus is underfunded. That's your US taxpayer dollars not at work. The US contributes about $500 million a year to the WHO, more than double any other country. But it seems that China is the one really pulling the strings. The Chinese Communist Party considers Taiwan a province of China, despite the fact that Taiwan is obviously its own country, which is why the WHO has refused to recognize the country of Taiwan because the People's Republic of China refuses to recognize the country of Taiwan and blocks it from entering the United Nations. The WHO is a UN agency. There have been about 300 infections and 3 deaths from the coronavirus in Taiwan. And remember, this outbreak began in China and spread because the Chinese Communist Party covered it up, which is why I call it the CCP virus. By the way, I provided a link below so you can download this image and share it on social media. But the fact that the WHO does not recognize Taiwan because of Chinese political pressure has become a big problem during the coronavirus pandemic. The good news is the WHO's treatment of Taiwan has become so cartoonishly bad, people are starting to take notice. Here's WHO Assistant Director General Bruce Aylward during a recent interview with Radio Television Hong Kong.
Would the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question, so let's please forget you asked whatever it was and move on to another question. Well, I think I know why he had a hard time hearing the question. You know, a lot of people have that problem these days. Anyway, the reporter followed up with another question about Taiwan and the WHO, and this time, Aylward accidentally hung up. So she called back.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
You know, I have to say, I think we all had the exact same reaction as this reporter. And then I saw it. That wasn't a snake in the WHO symbol in the background, it was a dollar sign. Now, this is not the first time Assistant Director General Aylward has said some pretty outrageous things about China during the coronavirus outbreak.
If I had COVID-19, I want to be treated in China.
Maybe that's because, as Aylward told a Washington Post reporter, he hadn't been to any dirty areas in Wuhan. That's a justification he gave for why he didn't need to be quarantined after visiting Wuhan back in February. He also hastily left the press conference because he had a plane to catch. He's a swell guy. But after his embarrassing interview with Radio Television Hong Kong went viral, the WHO mysteriously removed him from their website. I know, it's strange. Here's a Google cached image of the WHO website on March 28th. And then on March 29th, after the interview, poof, gone. So the WHO pretends like Taiwan doesn't exist. Then Aylward pretends like the question didn't exist. And now the WHO pretends like Aylward doesn't exist. I guess Aylward got Taiwan. That same day, the WHO issued a rare statement saying the question of Taiwanese membership in the WHO is up to WHO member states, not WHO staff. However, WHO is working closely with all health authorities who are facing the current coronavirus pandemic, including Taiwanese health experts. That's their emphasis, not mine. The next day, Taiwan said they had been sharing coronavirus information with the WHO, but the WHO was not passing that information on to their member states. That's right, even though Taiwan shares its coronavirus information with the WHO doesn't publish it for the rest of the world. That came after earlier accusations that the WHO just ignored Taiwan's questions at the start of the outbreak, and that the WHO had ignored Taiwan's warnings about human-to-human transmission of the coronavirus back in December. On December 31st, Taiwan reported to the WHO that Taiwanese doctors had heard from Chinese doctors that medical workers treating people with the coronavirus were getting sick. That's a sign of human-to-human transmission. But it seems that the WHO ignored that information. On January 14th, the WHO tweeted that preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus. Chinese officials didn't publicly announce any cases of human-to-human transmission until January 20th. That's 3 weeks after Taiwan had tried to report it to the WHO. So I think BBC might be making a slight understatement when it says Taiwan has become a problem for the WHO. Taiwan is seen as one of the few places in the world which has successfully stemmed the spread of the coronavirus without resorting to draconian measures. But despite its efforts, it is still effectively locked out of membership in the WHO due to its complex relationship with China. Complex relationship is also an understatement. But they're British, so give them a break. Speaking of complex relationships, the Hong Kong public broadcaster that did the interview with WHO official Bruce Aylward, in which he mysteriously couldn't hear the word Taiwan, is now in trouble. The Hong Kong government is accusing RTHK of violating the One China principle by asking about Taiwan and therefore breaking its charter. The good news is that RTHK is not backing down. Gosh, I almost feel bad for the WHO. Not only do they have to answer awkward questions about Taiwan, now they're going to have to answer awkward questions about Hong Kong, too. But that's what happens when you start licking the boots of the Chinese Communist Party. Hope they don't get the CCP virus. Next up, I'll answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. But first, did you know YouTube has been secretly unsubscribing people from the show? Take a moment to make sure you're still subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Today's Patreon question comes from Jackie. I laugh when the CCP reported no new cases. Anyway, my question is, how corrupt do you think the WHO is? I've seen a video by Ben Shapiro and they seem to be praising China, yet China is the one who really messed things up. Well, that is the question. I'm not really sure we can quantify how corrupt the WHO is, since they're probably not keeping meticulous records of their corruption. But I recently made an episode called Coronavirus, How WHO Corruption Helped It Spread. Check it out for the full story, but here are some of the highlights. Back in 2017, the Associated Press ran this piece, saying it found more than a third of the WHO's $2 billion budget went to travel, including a lot of first-class airfare and five-star hotels. And U.S. taxpayers are the biggest contributor to the WHO budget. Then there's the audit I referred to earlier. It found there has been a surge in internal corruption allegations across the whole of the organization, with the detection of multiple schemes aimed at defrauding large sums of money from the international body. That included an upsurge of internal complaints of corruption, fraud, and even sexual harassment from across the 7,000-strong organization, overwhelming an internal team of 4 full-time investigators and 2 consultants. Besides that, China has a bunch of shady investments in Ethiopia. I bring that up because the current head of the World Health Organization was a big player in the corrupt Ethiopian government. China also backed his campaign to lead the WHO. And if you just look at the really bizarre way the WHO has handled the coronavirus, from praising the Chinese Communist Party to denying the existence of Taiwan, you've got to suspect something is up. Which might be one reason why President Trump is looking to cut U.S. funding